Al Jazeera's investigative unit reveals the true scale of modern slavery in suburban Britain. Behind the high street, there's a hidden workforce under the control of slave masters.
They brought 30 guys. Then they tied me to the bed and the guys did their job.
Most of the initial victims of the modern slave trade were women exploited for sex. How much will we have to pay you for the girls?
500 each girl.
I'm doing
Now the market for slave labor spans a wide range of money-making activities. Thousands of residential homes have become cannabis farms run by Vietnamese gangs. Inside, one worker, trapped, alone, and afraid. Eastern European car washers tell us they work all day, all week, and live in squalor. We confront those accused of modern slavery.
I've just been surrounded with 10 cameras.
You punched someone in the stomach.
I haven't.
We reveal the blue-chip companies that may have been caught with slaves in their supply chains.
The scale of modern slavery in the UK is enormous. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg.
Are new forms of slavery fueling the growth of rich countries in today's globalized world? Across the world, more people are on the move than ever before. They're driven out of their countries by war and persecution, or they leave willingly, hungry for a new life in the wealthy West. But mass migration has also led to a new surge in the slave trade. Like the human cargo of 2 centuries ago, many victims of modern slavery are trafficked forcibly to the UK. Others are duped into going to Britain with the promise of jobs that don't exist. Thousands of others come voluntarily in search of a better life, only to fall into the hands of criminal gangs. At Britain's ports, the governments have set up special units to spot adults and children who are vulnerable to a life of servitude.
What we've seen in the past is young, vulnerable-looking girls travelling maybe with an older woman or a man who's controlling their passport and being quite a dominating force. So we're looking at people's behaviours first of all, and then if we've got any concerns, we're just asking a few more questions about why they're coming into the UK.
At Heathrow, one of the spotters briefs a colleague on an incoming flight.
At the moment, we've got the Romania flight from Bucharest coming through. So particularly on this flight, we've had a number of younger Eastern European girls being trafficked into the sex trade.
The spotters rescue some potential victims before their ordeal begins.
Where are you travelling from today? By yourself, or are you travelling with someone else?
With a couple of friends.
Okay.
But the sheer number of people pouring into Britain can be overwhelming. Tuan was trafficked to Britain from his home in Vietnam when he was just 15. His parents had both died by the time he was 10. He was taken to an orphanage in a nearby convent. After his father's death, his sick mother had borrowed from loan sharks. Now they came for their money. They demanded the church sign over the family home. When the church refused, the men turned violent.
They put my hands on a board. They took a knife, held my hand and chopped. They chopped off a part of a finger and wrapped it in a piece of paper. They'd kill me if I didn't sign the loan paper.
The severed finger was sent to the church as a warning, and they signed over the property. But the loan sharks abducted Tuan and enslaved him in a warehouse. A few years later, he was taken nearly 6,000 miles by lorry to a cannabis farm in the UK.
The warehouse was huge. There were many plants. They said there were vegetables in there. There were lots of lamps. I worked day and night. I had only 2 or 3 hours to sleep with only one blanket. It was very cold. I was better off dead because I worked so much. I was cold and hungry and beaten. I was so miserable. It would have been more comfortable to die.
Tuan comes from near Vinh City in central Vietnam. The province is a hotbed of people smugglers and human traffickers who transport locals across continents and into Britain. Using an undercover team, we tracked down one smuggler to this large gated house.
Nếu mà đi á, và đi thì bác này ta làm cho đi đến tất tần đi cả từ đây sang bên Anh tùy theo giá cả. Ví dụ mình đi vít một.
Our researchers posed as a couple hoping to live in Britain.
Đi rồi bác đưa cô ở đến Hà Tĩnh này, vừa đúng có 20 ngày. 20 ngày là đến Anh. Vừa đúng có 20 ngày là nộp hồ sơ xong hoàn tất đi cái là vừa đúng 1 tháng là đến Anh thôi. Nhanh.
The smuggler makes it sound easy, but the journey is fraught with danger and it costs a lot of money.
Làm như thế nhưng mà con mà đến đây bác đến giá là chỉ cần 2 thì có nghĩa là bác cho đưa nó ra sang Liên Xô rồi bác cho đi xe đường công vụ của nó đưa em đến Ba Lan đến nước và đến khác của bác bóc đi sang Anh luôn. Rồi bác đảm bảo là con này như thế là sự an toàn không phải đi chân dưới đất thế nào, mua cái xe đi đường công vụ đến cảng đến Ba Ba.
The smuggler brushes away our researchers' concerns about being forced into modern slavery.
Tại chúng là con nói là đi nhưng nếu mà đi mà đi cá nhân thì chúng lo, chúng sợ là cái người này vừa bán nhà con làm cơn nhiều vụ như thế lắm. Ôi, cháu đi là có chồng con đi mà đi tập thể không phải đi cá nhân của con mà chắc con đi đâu. Người ta đi là đi 5 người, có nghĩa đưa sang Liên Xô để đi học, nhưng thực tế không học, người ta lại cho đi sang các nước khác. Nhân cho nó cái cách để cho con có thể như đồ bài chứ. Chứ không phải như người ta bắt các con đi như Trung Quốc là Lạc Sơn là một ngày đâu mà phải lâu. Tao phải làm thế nào phải giàu có.
The smuggler says it will be easy to find jobs in Britain.
Nếu con mà sang đó mà bạn của anh mà xin cho đời không thì bảo bác nhờ con cháu lên du học, con đi du học á, nhà ăn xong có suất làm neo thuê người, thì khó làm.
Many Vietnamese women who make it safely to the UK do end up working in nail bars. Our investigation led us to a salon on the outskirts of London. Our undercover researcher Kim took a job there. Although we found no evidence of slavery, we discovered someone who'd been smuggled from Vietnam. The shop owner's sister had just been brought in illegally. The final leg of her journey, from France in a lorry, was the hardest.
Em mỗi lần em sợ, cứ xe công mà ngồi trên cabin, con bị tưới xà phăng mọi người không? Cái gì? Tưới xăng? Chó nó không ngửi thấy không? em có một anh đi, anh 126 tiếng anh thì năm em mà đi thế thì em chết ở trong xe, đúng ra nhịn hết tất cả các thứ
để khỏi đi tiểu rồi lỡ mắc rồi sao?
Ai mà biết thì đóng bỉm vào như của trẻ con.
Thế à? Ôi.
The nail bar owner describes the routes used by his sister.
Thế nó đi một phát từ Đài Loan sang Iran, không cần visa. Đó. Xong rồi sang visa nó bay ra Tơ Kỳ.
Iran.
Tơ Kỳ ấy, nó mới đi sang Hy Lạp. Một week này Hy Lạp. Thì sang Hy Lạp thì chỉ việc bắt tàu xe đi thẳng một mạch về Pháp thôi. Xong từ Pháp đấy, từ Pháp nó lại đợi tập trung đấy, nó đợi chuyến từ đây biên giới này sang Anh.
The smuggled women may be free to walk away, but without legal status or knowledge of English, they're often tied to their employers. Smuggled Vietnamese men often end up in a different trade. Kim made contact online with a man who'd become a gardener at a cannabis farm. He's kept inside an ordinary-looking terraced house on a suburban street.
Đây bên đây chỗ làm á. Đây có đứa nhỏ này. Đây. Cái lớp đứa nhỏ ấy. Đấy là mới ra được 3 ngày.
The man tending these cannabis plants hardly ever leaves the house. There's no furniture, just rows of plants. He breathes in fumes from chemical fertilizers, snatches a few hours' sleep on an old mattress, and lives in fear of his boss, the police, and armed thugs who want to steal the drugs.
Lâu có gặp mặt ai đâu cũng buồn đấy.
Vậy là anh làm này, anh mới làm 1 năm hả? Hay là mới mấy tháng?
Thu hoạch được 4 vụ ấy. Còn lại thì bị cướp.
Bị cướp hả?
Ở trong cái thời gian bị như kiểu bị trầm cảm ấy, kiểu lâu không tiếp xúc với người ngoài.
Like others toiling in Britain's cannabis houses, he believes he will earn a lot of money. But so far, it's a distant promise.
Thì không ra ngoài chỉ quan tâm công nhà khác như đi tù đâu. Mình cứ dùng như xem như là đi tù vài năm đấy. Trời. Làm vài năm có tiền rồi lúc đấy mình lại làm cái khác.
Our researcher keeps in contact with the gardener. Later, we'll see her enter the cannabis house to meet him. The scale of bonded labour in Britain led to a new law, the Modern Slavery Act, introduced in 2015. It defined modern slavery not in terms of shackles and chains, but forced labour, forced criminality, and any servitude obtained with threats, deception, or violence. The government also appointed an anti-slavery commissioner. Kevin Hyland recently returned from Vietnam. He went to the area where we met our people smuggler.
There is a network operating in that region who are exploiting people who start off as being smuggled, then as they move that turns into a case of trafficking because that becomes a debt bondage, and then they get moved into situations, for example, cannabis farms, even nail bars, or other situations where they are exploited and being forced to work in sometimes very dangerous situations.
The government estimates that there are around 13,000 modern slaves in Britain, with the largest numbers from Romania, Albania, Nigeria, Vietnam, and from Britain itself.
The assessment that we did in 2014 gave us 97 different countries that victims came from. That gives you a sense of that scale, 97 different countries that have been identified.
There's no doubt that the scale of modern slavery in the UK is enormous. We're just seeing, you might even say, just the tip of the iceberg.
Anne Reid is the anti-trafficking director at the Salvation Army. Since 2011, the charity has run government-funded safe houses for victims of modern slavery.
In the first year there was 380, but just in the last 6 months we've seen over 1,000 victims come into the service. A total of over 4,000 people being referred to the Salvation Army for support.
As the global market for human cargo increased, prostitution was the first industry to be exploited by modern slave traders. Stefan didn't plan to be a pimp, he wanted to be a rapper.
Aveam 17 ani când am început chestia asta. Aveam o formație de rap, aveam 2 dansatoare.
One day he was offered the chance to exploit his dancers.
La prima cerere mai mare a venit o persoană cu mult mai multă influență, cu mult mai mulți bani și mi-a zis ceva gen, îmi plac fetele astea. Ești dispus să poți să mi le pasezi pentru anumite treburi? Și am întrebat ce și cum. Am pus punct doar pentru a se întâlni și a stabili o sumă.
That was the start of 4 years as a pimp, exploiting young women in cities all over Europe. Anna comes from a poor family in western Romania. She was just 16 when she was forced to be a prostitute.
I feel terrible when I think about the days when I was forced to sleep with clients, to drink and take drugs with them.
It began when a Romanian man seduced her and took her to Italy. He said it was for a holiday, but then he ordered Anna to sell sex. She tried to refuse.
He became very angry and hit me. Clients also paid to beat me as well.
It was the beginning of 11 years as a sex slave, locked in dingy apartments and cheap hotel rooms. She was controlled by her ex-boyfriend, his brother, and also by a woman she refers to only as the bad lady.
I wasn't paid any money because the bad lady used to keep all the cash. They thought I was their slave, making money for them, making them happy.
Modern slavery is at its heart the buying and selling of a human being. The traffickers are often very ruthless. There's no holds barred, anything goes.
Stefan eventually spent 2 years in prison for ATM fraud and now has a legitimate job in London. He's agreed to take us into his former world, exposing the men and women who drag others into sexual slavery. He meets a Romanian pimp called Robert. Robert talks business with Stefan in his car, a car he didn't even have to buy. He runs a handful of prostitutes from Eastern Europe. They work all night. Robert controls their lives, but says he rarely needs to use physical violence.
Acum au apărut ale mai noi acum. Trebuie să știi multe de la femei de acasă și un sigur lucru care îl știi că l-are ea mai prețuit, atât ai zici. N-ai făcut, te-am făcut. De ce să dau eu o palmă când pot să le să le enervezi și să le bat din cuvinte, să le distrug psihic.
Câte zile le ții tu cum ar veni? Le ții non-stop? Cum le ții?
Pentru ele trebuie să devină o muncă, asta, o obișnuință. Să trezească singure din pas, să zic că stai că trebuie să mă duc la muncă.
In addition to threats of violence, we also see indirect threats. So if you don't do as I tell you to do, then your family at home will be targeted.
We know where your children are, we know where your mother lives, and if you don't do what we tell you, then there'll be real trouble.
Anna's controllers subjected her to both mental and physical abuse for years. They trafficked her all over Europe, to Austria, Spain, and then Britain.
They brought 30 guys to me to sleep with them. Then they tied me to the bed. Then the guys did their job. My madam was very happy. She was telling me that this is how I like it. I was telling her that no, I don't like it.
Police rescued Anna from a hotel in West London in March 2014. But it was not the end of her ordeal. She returned to Romania, but her controllers tracked her down, bundled her into a car, and brought her back to England.
Și am vrut ca să scap, deci pe ușă, ca să sparg ușa, n-am mai găsit nici cheia, nimic.
I wanted to escape from there and break down the door. I couldn't find the key. I was very scared. They turned off the light and told me to do what the clients wanted, because if I didn't, I don't deserve even to eat. They gave me cold water. They tortured me. They beat me up with a belt and said I was their slave.
Să mă creadă că slava ei.
Anna was taken to Leeds in the north of England, locked in a hotel room and forced once again to be a prostitute.
I was laying and thinking it was not worth being controlled by them anymore. It was better to take my own life.
In part 2, the form of modern slavery that's growing faster than prostitution. We reveal how big business in Britain could be profiting from modern slavery.
Modern slavery is happening all around us. It's in our communities. People tend to perceive it as being about sexual exploitation, but actually modern slavery takes on many forms.
3 or 4 years ago, we would have told you that sex trafficking is the major area of trafficking. We now know that trafficking for labour is about 50-50 with trafficking for sex.
Our investigation has found that the fastest growing sector of Britain's modern slave trade is unskilled labour. In part 1, our undercover researcher made contact through Facebook with a Vietnamese man who grows cannabis for a drugs gang. Alone, isolated, and speaking no English, he invites her into the cannabis farm. There's no furniture in this suburban house, just rows of plants grown under powerful lights.
Rồi điện này mình phải trả nhiều lắm á. Ngày nay mình đi trộm. Trộm hả? Sao trộm được hay vậy? Trộm chứ.
It's not unusual to find that the main electricity has been tampered with, which is highly dangerous. You know, you're risking your life.
and then you stay in conditions where you are breathing in sort of the pollen from the cannabis plants. Windows are taped up. Everything that's running is usually on an extractor fan with UV lights everywhere to grow the crop. They are horrendous conditions.
Phòng nào thu hoạch được thì thu hoạch phòng đấy. Rồi mình cắt hết lã, xong rồi cắt cả gốc, rồi trèo lên cái dây thế này, trèo ngược xuống để đo cái bọng này cho nó nóng rồi nó khô.
Nhưng mà ở nhà anh có biết anh sống cảnh vậy không?
Thì ở bên này công việc làm kiểu trong cái này họ cấm cho nói.
After our researcher leaves, the only other visitor to the house is a man who drops off food and supplies late at night. Days later, another man comes to collect the drugs harvest. It's a typical setup for Vietnamese cannabis gardeners.
They are kept in a house with no way of getting out. They're locked in, and they're there as, so say, gardeners cultivating those crops. With food brought to them, they are not allowed to get out and about and leave those premises.
Cannabis farms are one of the faces of modern-day slavery in the UK. The farms are dependent on the labour of the vulnerable and the dispossessed and the weak.
Parosha Chandran is a leading lawyer in the field of modern slavery. We showed her the evidence from our investigation.
There certainly appears to be an indication that the man there may be a victim of modern-day slavery. He's not regularly receiving profit, but he is hoping to receive that. I think his words were, "When I have money, I'll move to another job." So this person may be a victim of human trafficking for enforced criminality.
The new slavery law changed the way the police treat the vulnerable.
One of the good things about the Modern Slavery Act is actually recognising that they are victims of trafficking as opposed to actually be perpetrators of a crime, cannabis cultivation.
The legal test as to whether or not somebody is a victim and not a perpetrator of this crime of cannabis cultivation is whether or not they were under the dominant force of a trafficker. Certainly from this footage, I would hope that the person who has been filmed would be referred into the national referral mechanism, and then they would be able to achieve assistance and protection if they had been trafficked.
For one victim, there was a way out. Twan was just 15 when he was forced to work at a cannabis house in Britain.
One day I saw lots of people outside shouting. I just stood there. And when they forced the door open, came in and shouted police, I was very happy because the police had arrived. I gave my hands to the officers to handcuff. At that point I thought I'd been freed. I was very happy.
The vulnerable teenager was placed with a foster family, but his liberty was short-lived. Out shopping with his foster mother one day, he got lost in the crowds. Unable to ask for help in English, and with night falling, he started to panic. He was approached by a Chinese man who seemed friendly.
At first, when they took me to their home, they promised to help me find my foster mother. But when I got there, they locked me inside. After 6 months, they made me work, growing cannabis plants.
So how did that happen?
They beat me up, tied me up with a rope, and hung me up. I was chained in a lorry. I wasn't allowed to go outside. After I finished work, they locked me in a van and took me back to the warehouse. They chained me up and made me stay in the van.
He worked up to 20 hours a day with no pay, slept in a van, and was given just bread and potatoes to eat. Enslaved as a child, trafficked to Britain, rescued, and then enslaved again, Tuan finally escaped and was placed in the care of a charity.
I'm still afraid, every night, thinking of the days when I was beaten and locked in warehouses.
The police estimate that there are tens of thousands of commercial cannabis farms all over Britain. The gardeners inside include many slavery victims who are forced to commit crime and remain hidden from view. Britain has also seen a huge rise in the number of exploited people working in plain sight on the high streets of affluent towns and cities. At this car wash, prices start from just £6, around $10 US. But how can it be so cheap? Claudio says he knows. He came from Romania and worked at the car wash for 5 months. He agreed to secretly film the workers' conditions. He starts with their accommodation, temporary cabins where up to 6 people sleep in a small room.
Aici, când plouă, cum este azi, plouă de aici, de sus, de aici, este crăpat tot, te putem observa. Geamul e asemănător, mucegai. Și încă un lucru, ghiveata nici nu funcționează. Uite. Dar asta e mai problemă că nu se închide. Nu se închide. E deschis totdeauna. Deci, pe de altă parte, avem condiții de căcat. Pentru asta plătim 40 de lire pe săptămână. Pentru treaba asta. Pentru treaba asta.
Most of the workers are Romanian. They say they're paid £35 for working over 12 hours a day. That's less than half Britain's legal minimum wage. But they claim that sometimes they're paid even less.
Am venit. Și cât o dată asta? 80. Pe cât timp? Pe cât timp? Eu știu pe cât timp. Săptămâna asta. Săptămâna trecută mi-a dat, nu mi-a dat de fapt. Cum te simți aici, în carvașul ăsta?
Tu sunteți sclavi aici.
Spune-mi cum te simți tu aici.
Suntem tratați mai rău ca niște slugi.
One of the workers calls a friend in Romania.
Normal, unde pula mea e mai bine ca la spălătorie. Și la spălătorie e moarte curată. Mori în pula mea. Te duci puli des.
People may be coming to this country voluntarily. They may be thinking that they're coming for a job, only to find that that job isn't what they thought it was going to be, or that they're being kept in absolutely appalling conditions. They're not getting the salary that they were promised. Then there are deductions for travel, for accommodation, for transit to work, and all of that sort of thing. So they are being duped.
The car wash owner is Avion Alesi, a 35-year-old Albanian with British citizenship. One of the tricks of his trade seems to be keeping his workers in debt and taking their travel documents. The workers say he imposes huge fines for minor damage to cars. In one case, £600. In another, 800.
Păi ieși lui ăsta buletinul. Muncește o zile pentru că nu cu avion.
Aspiratorul, roțile de arăt. 450. Păi de ce să ne oprești? Am pus în ziua liberă.
Poți să făcut să lași buletinul? Da, dar nu mi-au luat buletinul ca să mă plec.
They claim there's physical violence as well.
Dar pentru ce l-a bătut?
Păi eu știu că nu mai ți cu ce a greșit.
Da, mă, mâncat, greșești.
Când a furat în ai fost. A, păi și pe ăsta, nu că l-a bătut așa lui. Ia câteva așa, foc.
Ce frică de el?
Băi, frică.
Ce frică de el?
Dai seama.
Frică tare?
Băi, nu că mi-e frică să faci brânza, asta e faci să nu mă caute, mă. Mi-e frică să nu mă caute.
Unlike the slaves of the past, no one is physically shackled. Workers say they are held by psychological chains, fear, poverty, and desperation. Leaving is not easy. Those who risk it will spend what little money they have to escape. One evening, Claudio hears a worker on the phone. He's been told to pay hundreds of pounds for accidentally damaging a car. He begs someone to help him get away.
Vezi ca un knock încercam și vreau să plec de aici la muncă. Și nu știu cum să le spuneți la șoferi ăștia după ce pleacă, după ce lasă persoanele astea și pleacă să mă sune pe numărul ăsta. Am bani, am tot, nu contează cât este.
He walks out at 1 a.m., leaving his few belongings behind.
If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. The streets are not paved with gold, and there are some very, very nasty people out there who would be looking to exploit you and make your life a misery.
Avion Alesi's workers appear to be like any others in Canterbury. It's an impression that he encourages. When I posed as a local businessman with a fleet of cars that needed cleaning, Alesi told me his workers were part-timers, happy to be there.
Are you Avion?
Yes.
Hi,
Sorry
Avion.
to be honest to me, yes.
Okay, no, you've obviously been a busy boy. Your prices are low. Yeah. And what about you guys? Do they do long days?
No, some of the guys are part-time. Some of them they start 10 o'clock, finish 4 o'clock. Some of them they start 9 o'clock, finish 3 o'clock. Some of them they start 8 o'clock and they finish 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
They just mixed around, you know.
So the shifts are quite short, about 6 hours, are they?
Yeah, around 6 hours, you know, like in part-time basis. They might work 4 or 5 days a week, you know.
According to evidence gathered by our undercover researcher, this is not true. Alesi is also keen to boast of his contract with a large car dealership.
These are contract cars,
Yeah,
right?
all
Volvo cars, you know, so Volvo from across the road. And we do, like, these are full valets. We do up to 4 or 5 a day. So, yes.
Okay, and how long have you been doing Volvo for?
About 3, 4 years now, 5 years.
Okay.
Yes. And we took a new site in Elsworth just recently, and we're doing the Volvo up there as well.
When asked about where the workers live, he is evasive.
They all come from, well, local. They all live locally.
In an attempt to win my business, he cuts his prices.
If you do it inside and out and hand polish, which is for £20 there, I can do it for 15.
This footage appears to show all the hallmarks of forced labour. I have grave fears that these workers are victims of human trafficking. This is something that needs to be tackled very strongly by swift and effective and strong law enforcement.
Acest Volvo îl facem în fiecare marți și vineri. Acum, deocamdată, suntem 3 băieți aici. Este observat, sunt destule mașini. Dați-vă seama pe gheață. Cum speli mașinile pe frig.
What is absolutely necessary is for Volvo to investigate all parts of its supply chain in terms of labour. Who is cleaning its cars?
We also filmed USA hand car washers working at a nearby Kia dealership, Harbour Garage.
Last year, there was a significant increase in the amount of people who are in forced labour, and we realised that a large percentage of these are in legitimate supply chains. Companies need to start to understand that this is exploitation. It is modern-day slavery happening in the United Kingdom.
Claudio has stopped filming and walked away from the car wash. He plans to return to Romania.
Good to see you. Hello. How are you, mate? You well?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Right off.
Am slăbit. Când am venit aici în Anglia aveam 78 de kilograme. Acum dacă am 65. M-am distrus la mâini de la soluții. Toți țipau, am psihic, nu e bine deloc, psihic. Toți țipă, toți. I-am întrebat de ce nu pleacă și au spus că ori n-au unde, ori nu știi limba, să plece în altă parte. Acasă nu au ce face și o să trebuie să accepte treaba asta. Nu i-am spus nici la mama, nici la fratele meu, nici la nimeni în ce condiții stau. A fost, adică tot timpul o să mă gândesc la asta.
I went back to the car wash to put our findings to the owner, Avion Alesi. He was just back from a skiing holiday.
We've been investigating your car wash for some time now, and we have clear evidence that you are breaching the law. Have you heard of something called the Modern Slavery Act?
No, I've not breached
Okay.
any of those.
Well, you've been keeping people doing 13-hour shifts. You've got them living in those little containers there in squalid conditions.
I haven't been, you know, so...
Well, we've got footage of it. We've got film of it. You're keeping
Which
people in
allegation?
conditions
You
of
can go
modern
and accuse
slavery.
anybody for anything. I am not mother slaving anybody. No, nobody's breaching any laws.
How about the worker you punched in the stomach in the office? What do you say about that?
Anybody.
Is he lying as well?
I've not punched anybody. I am not doing nothing where I should not do. I'm cleaning cars every day. I work 7 days a week myself. I've got 3 kids to grow up, which I really look after. I work 7 days a week, and I never ever forced anybody. I never forced anybody or told anybody neither to stay in here or nobody. You can't do that here. You can't do that anywhere in the world.
But we know now that you are keeping workers in conditions of modern slavery.
Not keeping
You know?
anybody there.
Yeah.
Do you understand English?
It's not against their will. Well, explain why someone who was so frightened of you...
Who is frightened of me?
That he ran away
You're
in the...
not frightened of me.
No, he ran away in the middle of the night.
Am I threatening you with anything?
You're not threatening me, I hope
I
not.
am threatening anybody
That'd
here.
be another
I've just
offence.
been surrounded with 10 cameras.
Well, you can use the language.
Have
whatever
I
you like. You
done-
punched someone in the stomach.
I haven't.
You dock money from people who scratch
haven't.
cars. You take £600 from one man.
I haven't done that.
He worked for weeks with no pay.
I haven't done that to anybody.
So this is all fabricated. Everybody apart from Avion is telling the truth.
Sorry, can you just
Is that right? Let's go and look at the accommodation. Let's go. Come and show us the
You're not going
accommodation.
through that door. You know, you've got no right to go there. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a lovely day.
Okay? I'm not here to slave nobody. I don't do things like that. I'm not interested in things like that. Goodbye now. Peace. Have a lovely day.
Alazi's big brand customers responded to the allegations of slavery in their supply chain. Volvo Cars said its code of conduct stated its employees and franchises must comply with the law. The Lipscomb dealership said it did comply with Volvo's code of conduct. Kia Motors UK told us it expected all its dealers to obey the law. Kia Harbour Garage said it was shocked and concerned by our allegations and is investigating.
The legitimate and the illegitimate economy become one in some ways, because actually companies and people don't realise sometimes that they are using people who are exploited, and that they are using modern day slaves in their supply chain.
And Britain's growing demand for cut-price goods and services is fueling that exploitation.
This is a horrendous crime. The suffering of the victims is beyond anything that we can often imagine. And so anything that can be done to bring human trafficking and modern slavery to an end should be done.